The autumn sun cast long shadows across the volcanic shores of Florina Island as the Nantucket whaling vessel Essex dropped anchor in October 1820. Captain George Pollard Jr. gazed across the blue-green waters of the harbor, knowing his crew needed fresh provisions for the long journey ahead into the Pacific whaling grounds. What they sought wasn't swimming in the ocean depths, but crawling slowly across the ancient lava fields that stretched inland from the beach. The sailors launched their whaleboats and rowed through the gentle swells toward shore, their oars cutting through water so clear they could see the rocky bottom beneath. As they beached their boats on the black sand, the men shouldered coils of rope and canvas straps, following well-worn paths that had been trampled into the volcanic rock by creatures far older than any human settlement. Young Thomas Nickerson, the ship's cabin boy barely 17 years old, picked his way carefully through the maze of broken basalt and thorny saltbush. Prickly pear cacti towered overhead, their broad green pads bristling with spines that could puncture leather boots. The air was thick with the musty scent of guano and the occasional calls of blue-footed boobies diving for fish in the nearby waters. But Nickerson and his shipmates were keeping a sharp lookout, as he would later write in his journal, for the object of their search. They were hunting giants. The Galápagos giant tortoises had roamed these islands for millions of years, evolving into distinct species on each landmass. Evolution had sculpted them differently depending on their environment. Those on the lush, highland areas developed high-domed shells that could support their necks as they stretched upward to reach hanging vegetation, while those in the arid lowlands like Florina had developed shells that curved upward at the front like Spanish riding saddles, allowing them to extend their long necks to graze on cacti and low shrubs. When the sailors found a smaller tortoise, weighing perhaps 200 pounds, they would work together to flip the ancient creature onto its back. The tortoise would wave its thick, scaly legs helplessly in the air as the men secured canvas straps around each limb, then hoisted their living cargo onto their backs like an enormous, breathing knapsack. The weight was crushing, but the promise of fresh meat for months made the burden worthwhile. The truly massive specimens, some weighing more than 500 pounds and measuring over 4 feet in length, required a different approach. These patriarchs of the island, possibly over a century old, demanded the efforts of an entire crew. The sailors would lash the giant's legs to long wooden poles, then form teams of 2 or 3 men on each side, carrying their captive like some prehistoric sedan chair across the treacherous landscape of knife-sharp lava rock and thorny vegetation. Back aboard the Essex, the tortoises met a fate that would horrify modern conservationists. The crew stacked them upside down in the ship's dark hold like a grotesque collection of living bowls, one nested inside another. Here lay perhaps the cruelest aspect of their capture. These magnificent creatures could survive up to a year without food or water, making them perfect living larders for long ocean voyages. They neither eat nor drink, nor is the least pains taken with them, wrote Owen Chase, the ship's first mate, with a callousness that reflected the era's view of animals as mere resources. They are strewed over the deck, thrown underfoot, or packed away in the hold, as it suits convenience. The tortoises lay there in the darkness, their ancient eyes staring at nothing, breathing slowly as the ship rolled with the Pacific swells. The Essex crew took more than 60 of Florina's saddleback tortoises, creatures that young Nickerson would remember as providing the most rich, flavored and delicious meat I have ever met with. These tortoises had survived the rise and fall of countless generations, had witnessed the arrival of the first Spanish explorers in 1535, and now found themselves trapped in the belly of a ship bound for the hunting grounds where sperm whales roamed. A month later, in one of history's most famous maritime disasters, the Essex encountered an enormous sperm whale in the deep Pacific. The enraged Leviathan rammed the ship with such force that it began to founder immediately. As the vessel listed and took on water, the desperate crew managed to salvage as many tortoises as they could fit into their 3 small whaleboats before the Essex slipped beneath the waves, taking the remaining tortoises with it to a watery grave. What followed was an epic of survival that would inspire Herman Melville's masterpiece, Moby Dick. Adrift in the vast Pacific, the survivors sustained themselves on the tortoise meat for as long as it lasted, before eventually resorting to the ultimate taboo, cannibalism, to survive their 90 days at sea. The Essex was merely one ship among hundreds that treated the Galápagos as a living pantry. When Charles Darwin arrived at Floriana in September 1835 aboard HMS Beagle, the young naturalist was beginning the observations that would eventually revolutionize humanity's understanding of life itself. But even as he marveled at the island's unique creatures, he was witnessing the aftermath of a biological catastrophe. Darwin heard tales from local residents and passing sailors of whaling vessels that would arrive with empty holds and leave with as many as 700 tortoises crammed into their ships. Their numbers have of course been greatly reduced in this island, he wrote with characteristic understatement, not yet grasping the full scope of the devastation. The numbers tell a story of systematic obliteration. When Spanish explorer Fray Tomás de Bolonga first stumbled upon the Galápagos in 1535, driven off course by contrary winds and currents, an estimated 300,000 giant tortoises roamed across the 15 islands of the archipelago. Each island had developed its own distinct species, a living laboratory of evolution that had been millions of years in the making. But between 1774 and 1860, during the height of the global whaling industry, passing ships systematically harvested approximately 100,000 of these ancient giants. Pirates, whalers, traders, and explorers all participated in the slaughter, viewing the tortoises as nothing more than convenient sources of fresh meat that required no refrigeration or preservation. The impact was catastrophic. All 15 species of Galapagos tortoises saw their populations crash into steep decline. The curved shell saddlebacks of the arid lowlands were particularly vulnerable, as they lived in easily accessible coastal areas where ships typically anchored. 3 species vanished entirely from the face of the earth, their genetic legacy erased forever. The Floriana tortoise, with its elegant saddleback shell perfectly adapted to life among the cacti and thorny shrubs, was the first to disappear. The last confirmed sighting occurred sometime in the 1850s, making it one of the earliest documented extinctions in the Galapagos and a stark reminder of humanity's capacity to destroy in mere decades what nature had spent millennia creating. For nearly 150 years, the Floriana tortoise existed only in museum collections, scientific illustrations, and the faded journal entries of long-dead sailors. Dusty specimens sat in archives, their shells carefully measured and catalogued, serving as silent testimony to a lost world. Scientists studied these remains, noting the distinctive characteristics that had once allowed these creatures to thrive in Floriana's unique environment. The story might have ended there, another melancholy footnote in the catalogue of human-caused extinctions, were it not for a remarkable discovery that would begin to unfold in the year 2000. At the dawn of the new millennium, a team of conservation scientists found themselves hiking through the remote and densely vegetated gullies at the base of Wolf Volcano, located on the northern tip of Isabella Island, the largest landmass in the Galápagos archipelago. Wolf Volcano rises nearly 5,600 feet above sea level, its slopes creating a series of distinct microclimates from the arid coastal zones to the misty highlands. The scientists had come to conduct a routine survey of the tortoise populations that lived on the volcano's slopes. For years, researchers had known that Wolf Volcano was home to one of the largest remaining populations of Galápagos tortoises, with thousands of the iconic dome shell variety grazing on the lush vegetation of the higher elevations. But as the team moved through the thorny underbrush of the lower slopes, something caught their attention. Among the familiar high-dome tortoises, they began spotting individuals that looked distinctly different. These tortoises had shells that curved upward at the front, the characteristic saddleback shape that had been extinct for over a century. There were pockets of tortoises that looked out of place, recalls James Gibbs, a conservation biologist who serves as a National Geographic explorer and leader of the Galápagos Conservancy, the organization dedicated to protecting and restoring the archipelago's wild ecosystems. The discovery was puzzling. How could saddleback tortoises be living on Wolf Volcano when they were supposed to be adapted to arid, low-elevation environments? And more intriguingly, why did some of these saddlebacks bear a resemblance to the long-extinct Floriana species? The answer, it would turn out, lay hidden in the genetic code of these mysterious tortoises, and in a tale of survival that stretched back to the very ships that had supposedly wiped out the Floriana species forever. What the scientists had stumbled upon was nothing less than a biological crime scene that had been waiting 150 years for forensic investigation. The saddleback tortoises of Wolf Volcano weren't supposed to exist, but there they were, carrying within their DNA the secrets of one of conservation's most audacious possibilities, the resurrection of an extinct species. The genetic analysis that followed would push the frontiers of scientific detection, revealing a story of survival against impossible odds and setting the stage for one of the most ambitious conservation projects ever attempted. The descendants of those tortoises taken aboard ships like the Essex had not all perished in the depths of the Pacific or in the cooking pots of hungry sailors. Some had survived, and they had been waiting patiently on the slopes of a remote volcano for science to finally catch up with the truth. The Floriana tortoise was not truly extinct. It lived on, hidden in plain sight, ready to reclaim its ancestral home and restore an ecosystem that had been incomplete for nearly 2 centuries. This was just the beginning of an extraordinary scientific journey that would span continents, require cutting-edge genetic technology, and ultimately attempt to right one of the great wrongs in the natural history of the Galápagos Islands. The giants were coming home,